of those, I don't know, I just got that image in the internet. To look at the evil eye, evil eyes, right? And try to imagine watching a horror movie and you see this in the movie and you can't get it out of your mind. All of a sudden, after you watched the movie, you went home and, by the way, while you were watching the movie, whenever these eyes appear, the whole cinema would shout, "Ah!" And people will be so afraid because when you look at those red eyes, it's full of evil. It's so scary. And imagine after watching the movies, you go home and in the middle of the night, you're walking and your kids or your helper sees you and they started shouting as if they saw those evil eyes in you. and you're wondering why. Why are they so afraid? And not realizing whenever you look at them, you're looking at them with evil eyes. Philippians chapter 1. Last week, we were studying how Paul was trying to alleviate the concerns of the church in Philippi. Because, we learned that the relationship of Paul and the church in Philippi was so close. They were so intimate, like father and child. And whatever happens to the child, the father feels the pain. And whatever happens to the father, the child feels the pain. And last week, Paul was telling the church in Philippi, guys, don't worry. Because everything is going well. The gospel is progressing greatly. Don't lose heart. Remain faithful. Because Paul knew that chances are, yung sufferings nila, the sufferings of Paul that he is experiencing in Rome, is probably the same sufferings that the church in Philippi was experiencing against the Roman Empire. And Paul was telling them, guys, remain, be faithful. Because you might not know it, your faithfulness is blessing both the believers and unbelievers. And we saw how that was happening, right? Paul was tied up to the Praetorian guards, the people that was behind the throne. We saw how the Praetorian guards was so powerful that they were able to install their own emperor. And Paul had an audience with them. He was speaking to them every single day. Every 4 hours, a new Praetorian guard would be tied to him 8 inches far. Because the chains at the time was just 8 inches. And his obedience to God brought him to that place in jail. And they thought that the gospel was put down. But in reality, it was not. It was progressing to places that was unreachable before. The Praetorian guards, how can you share to them? It's like saying, how can you share to the PCGG now? PSG, right? I don't know anyone unless you're tied and chains with them. And Paul was telling them, remain, be faithful. The gospel is progressive. Don't be discouraged. And he was telling them also that as you remain and be faithful in Christ, believers are being encouraged. Fellow believers were observing Paul, and because of their observance, they became bold. They were not afraid anymore to share the gospel. They became fearless. And the faithfulness of Paul became a jumping board for believers in Rome to be bold, to be fearless for the gospel. And he tells basically the church in Philippi, Be faithful. Remain. Though it might be hard, though it might be long, God is working in the midst. But now, Paul, as we continue in verse 15 to 17, tells us, yes, everything is good, but not all is well. Because despite the fact that the gospel and the ministry was progressing, there were some believers that was trying to cause distress, that was trying to cause troubles to Paul. And according to our passage, can you go to the next verse now? They were preaching Christ from envy and revelry. Verse 17, they were proclaiming Christ out of selfish ambition. Not everything is well, because there were other Christians in Rome that were doing it out of bad motives. You know, I realized that when you're successful, success brings a lot of benefits. You have a lot of money, a lot of false friends. I don't know if that's good. You know, when you're successful, when you're powerful, a lot of people tend to gravitate to you, right? For a doctor, if you're successful, what happens? You travel a lot. Lagi yung mga pharmaceutical will send you out. For a businessman, you become rich. For a politician, you become a senator, if not a president or a congressman. For lawyers, you might end up at the Supreme Court. But I realized that with every success has a bedfellow. The one that accompanies success wherever success goes. And you know what that is? Jealousy and envy. Whenever there's success, there are people around that successful person who are jealous, who are envious. Sa ating mga Pilipino, we call it naiinggit. And for us, for Filipinos, it's bad because we have what we call the crab mentality, wherein people would like to pull you down. If somebody's going up, guess what would the Filipino do? They will pull you down. Because ayaw silang malamangan. And wherever there's success, there's people around that feels that way. They want to try to undo whatever that person has done. The fame, the recognitions, the power. Wherever there's power, there are jealous people around. Wherever there's rich people, there's jealous people around. That's why people fight. They slander. In some extreme case, they kill. And we see this happening throughout history. But the sad part is this. Even in Christianity, even in a group of believers, envy and jealousy and revelry abounds. You know, you would think that sin is only for unbelievers, that inggitan, but even in Christian communities, that is prevalent. Yet unnoticed. It is a sin that no one seemingly does not recognize. A sin that no one really talks about. Case in point, you. We claim we're Christians, but do we get jealous? Do we get envious? You know, when we enter Christianity, we think, we have this notion that it is Shangri-La, where everything is good, everything is nice, everything is going out as planned. Everybody is encouraging one another. Everybody is loving one another. The sad truth that's far from the truth. So sad. You know, there's this true story. There's this preacher, his name is F.B. Meyer. He was telling a story about a friend of his from London, who was praying for another pastor who was in the States. That they sent him off on a mission trip to the States during the 1800s, I guess. And this pastor was always praying day and night on his knees, praying that his friend who is now in the States trying to do mission work would progress at the work of God, and that community would abound. But sabi niya, something changed. Sabi niya, it became harder for me to pray now. Because now that pastor came back and has a church just beside mine. And he couldn't pray for that. At the back of his mind, and especially if that pastor's church is growing and his is not, he becomes envious. He stops praying. And we fail to realize we're really one body. The success of one is the success of the other. We tell ourselves that it's okay for other people to be successful as long as they're not my friends. As long as they're not my relatives. Because if it's my friends and it is my relative, guess what? I deserve it. I'm more deserving of success. And we become envious. And we become jealous. And we think that during the time of Jesus, during the time of Paul, this was not prevalent. But it was prevalent during the early church. Sometimes we have this notion that, now there's always fighting, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure during the time of Paul, during the time of Jesus, there was none. Far from it. There were a lot of fighting brought about by envy and jealousy in the early church. Even the patriarchs' time, there were still a lot. And look at this. In verse 15. Paul now gives the other side. Yes, Paul was sharing his success that was going on, but now he gives the flip side. He says, some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry. Next slide, Bambi. I intentionally did a rewrite of the same verse in this manner, because I want us to understand that this verse, 15 to 17, is what they call chiasm in Greek. I'm not really I didn't study Greek, but I study a lot, so I happen to know this. And the point here that I want you to see is, point A is some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry. Point B, which is part of verse 15, so you see A, B, B, A. Right? Point B are counterpoints to point A's. Which means the point of the passage is really point A. The emphasis that Paul wants to show here is some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition. The other 2 points in the middle was just placed there to provide a counterpoint, to emphasize the main point.